Hello guys and welcome to another episode. Now on Sri Lanka's east coast lies a super fun, easy to surf right hand point break. It's a wave that attracts surfers from all around the world, and the wave has paved the way to a town that is now a bright blinking green light on the global surfing radar. Today the town comes complete with surf hostels, surf camps, yoga retreats, cafes, bars, restaurants, all the trappings of any thriving surf town from around the world. But in this particular corner of Sri Lanka, things haven't always been this way. In fact, it's only over the past decade that Arugam Bay has come into its own. Its history, however, is plagued with turmoil. From a civil war that raged across the country for almost 3 decades, to devastating natural disasters and political unrest. It's no doubt that this surf town has had an extremely turbulent history, and in today's video, we're going to dive deep into that history. Our story today begins back in 1964, when American surfer Rusty Miller travelled through the country with a couple of mates hunting for waves. This was the first time the potential for waves in Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, had really been explored. The friends made their way down the coast of Sri Lanka, along its southwestern flank, and as you'd expect, they found waves. Virgin waves among a beautiful backdrop. One of the waves they found was a hollow left-hand point. They surfed at some incredible white sand beaches that all backed by lush tropical jungle. I mean, if you think Sri Lanka's beautiful now, back then, imagine how untouched it would have been. It would have been so stunning to surf there back then, and these guys were just surfing really fun waves totally by themselves. Around the same time, a group of local surfers from Colombo had begun surfing some of the beaches to the south of the city, and so sort of a local crew had sort of established themselves as surfers as well. Now, this exploration and this sort of rise of the local crew out of Colombo also coincided with the hippie trail. Now, the hippie trail is a famous backpacking route back in the 70s where anyone sort of wanting to go against society would head over to India. And during that time, India and later Sri Lanka were great places to go and enjoy that. So this hippie trail included many surfers, and the trail had gradually begun to extend from India down to Sri Lanka. So naturally, surfers who were looking for waves, among other things, followed the path down to Sri Lanka. Surfers from Australia had also begun visiting the country after destinations that were closer to home, such as Bali and parts of Indonesia, had gotten really well known and really crowded. So Sri Lanka was this sort of more mystical, less crowded alternative to Bali. And sort of different pockets and different crews of surfers began to spring up around the country. And it was actually Hikkaduwa on the southwestern coast that became the main surf town. Now in Hikkaduwa there's plenty of different waves. Now the surfers who were hanging out in Hikkaduwa were living super simply, surfing fun beach break waves, surfing the A-frame reef out the front. It was a very, very consistent and very easy place to hang out and score waves. But eventually rumours of other waves around the country began to spread. So meanwhile, over on the east coast, a tiny fishing village was quietly ticking along. The people and place completely unaware of the aquatic wave riding riches that it held on its doorstep. Now, there are several stories about how Arugam Bay actually got its name. The most common one that I found whilst researching for this video is that the name derives from the sacred grass that used to grow around Arugam Bay. It doesn't actually grow there anymore, and so yeah, that's how it got its name. There's many other different stories as well. So with these rumours, surfers began to push their exploration further east. Now, getting to the east coast of Sri Lanka was pretty difficult back then. I mean, I think it's pretty hard now, getting driven there in the back of an air-conditioned taxi, so I can't imagine what it was like back then. There weren't many good roads, obviously the trains didn't go over that far. So to get to the east coast and to Arugam Bay back then was basically a 3-day bus journey. Back then, Arugam was a tiny village, comprising only fishing huts, sandy tracks, and the odd family-run homestay. There was no electricity or running water, and it was generally just a wild, relatively unexplored stretch of coast. Now, the first surfers who ventured over to the east coast spent their time in Arugam Bay surfing what is now known as Main Point, the right-hand point break just on the edge of town, and then later explored some of the other breaks in the vicinity. Now, the wave that they found here was really long, really forgiving. It wasn't the same sort of shape that you might find in Indo or Fiji or back in Australia. It wasn't this hollow freight train. It was a really friendly, highly enjoyable wave to just surf and do turns on. Now, these surfers essentially lived the bare bones surf trip dream, you know, they lived off coconuts and fish and fruit and rotis and just went surfing and had a good time. And from all accounts, it just sounds like the dream surf trip scenario. So as more and more surfers caught wind of the waves that were available on the East Coast, more and more surfers flocked to Arugam Bay, and the town began to sort of establish itself as sort of a really basic surf town. I mean, it was still far from what it is today, but more sort of hardcore surfers began to head there, and it started to become a more famous surf destination. But after the initial surfing boom in Arugam Bay and the general realization that Ceylon had amazing waves, surf exploration in the country was halted as the country plunged into a violent 26-year-long civil war. Now, we won't go too deep into the whole civil war thing on this channel, but in short, the civil war happened as a result of political tension between the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, or as they were known most commonly, the Tamil Tigers, and the government-backed Sinhalese. The Tamils were mostly Hindu, whereas the Sinhalese were Buddhists. And as with many instances throughout history, the British are partly to blame for some of the conflict. During the colonial era, 1850 to 1948, the British used to own Sri Lanka, and they exploited it for tea, coffee, sugar and rubber. The British brought Tamils from India to work on said plantations, and this eventually sparked conflict with the original Sinhalese population. Then in 1948, Sri Lanka gained its independence from the British, and a law was drawn up that was clearly discriminatory against the Tamil population, and this rising tension eventually led to the Civil War in 1983. Now, despite the conflict and as the war raged on, it didn't deter the hardiest of surf explorers. Plenty of surfers still visited the country, and Arugam Bay was, for many, worth the risk. So despite all this conflict, you had these hardcore surf travelers still going there. You know, they thought the waves were worth the risk. They also thought it would be less crowded, as Sri Lanka now had this bad reputation that it was a dangerous place, there was war there and that you shouldn't go. You know, most of us would just go, oh, I'm going to go to Bali, or go to somewhere famous, you know, and easy and safe and well known. Arugam still grew, albeit really slowly, as a surf town. And to be honest, the town of Arugam itself wasn't directly affected by the war. It was actually in the surrounding area and other parts of the country. But Sri Lanka's overall reputation prevented many surfers from going there, and therefore halted its growth as a surf destination. Then things turned from bad to terrible when in 2004, on Boxing Day, a deadly tsunami hit the Sri Lankan coast. Now, the tsunami was caused as a result of a 9.3 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Sumatra. It devastated many parts of Asia, and Sri Lanka was one of the worst affected countries in the disaster. The disaster wreaked havoc across Sri Lanka, leaving 30,000 people dead and leaving almost 1 million homeless. Now, because Arugam is on the east coast, it was one of the worst affected surf towns during the tsunami. And while the population was small, approximately 5,000 people lived there, 1,200 of them lost their lives. This included thousands of homes, and it just overnight wiped out a growing surf community that was establishing itself in the town, not to mention all the local people that lived there already. And it took years for the town and for the country to recover. But things eventually began to look up. As the country and as Arugam Bay began to rebuild itself from the impact of the tsunami, 5 years later, in 2009, the civil war ended as the Sri Lankan government eventually defeated the Tamil Tigers. Now, while Sri Lanka was rebuilding, in Arugam Bay specifically, it took around 5 years for the town to build itself back into anything that resembled what the town was like pre-tsunami. But now, with the tsunami well in the rear view, civil war over, the town finally had a chance to build. Now, over the next decade or so, surf camps, hostels, accommodations, restaurants sprung up all over Arugam Bay, and the town was heavily invested in from abroad. Most notably, a lot of this investment came from Israel. Now, Israeli citizens can't travel to Indonesia, so they couldn't enjoy the spoils of Bali and the boom of Indonesian surf exploration. But Sri Lanka served as the perfect alternative, and it still is today. So even now, many businesses around Arugam and Sri Lanka are Israeli owned. So what's Arugam like today? Now today, Arugam is thriving, you know, it's obviously with its reputation and with sort of that influx of surfers and money, it does bring the crowds. It is a very, very crowded place, but I don't think it's somewhere that's lost its charm, you know, it's still a very unique place to visit. I've been a couple of times and had some pretty fun waves, like nothing you could describe as world class, but just fun point breaks. It's really, really warm. People are really, really friendly, if not a little too friendly. And it's probably the only place where in the space of a morning, I've surfed really, really fun waves, eaten an amazing curry for like $3, seen a king cobra on the beach and been hassled for a taxi 10 times between walking from the surf to my apartment. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting and really unique place. Now it's got everything you need. There's loads of hostels, loads of surf camps. It's quite a safe place. You know, there's lots of waves in the vicinity, but the main one is Main Point, which is like a really fun right-hand point. It looks like it's a sand bottom point, but it actually breaks over reef. It's pretty mellow, but you've got some sections that are pretty punchy that you can rip into on a shortboard. Otherwise, you've got Baby Point on the inside of it, which is like a really mellow sort of beginner beach break slash point break. It's quite a weird but really cool little setup. The season, you need to go there between April and October. There's not really any waves outside of that season, so that's your main season. Obviously it is really, really crowded, especially Main Point. On a busy day there can be like 50 plus guys out there, which is pretty insane. Like I said, there are other waves, but I'll let you go and find them yourself. The town's basically just this one long street, and everything, like I said before, like your hotels, restaurants, bars is just along it. So wherever you stay, you can kind of just walk to everything around town. There's loads of other cool things to do as well. Like you can go on safari down in Yala National Park or out the back of Arugam Bay. It's a really, really beautiful place. You know, you can go and see Asian elephants, like monkeys, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool. So yeah, that is the history of Arugam Bay in a nutshell. So if you've got any more information, or better still, you went to Sri Lanka like back in the day and you could tell me a story about what it was like back then, I'd love to hear it. I love reading all your comments, guys. I know I can't actually reply to many of you because otherwise I'd get no editing done, but I do love to read them, so please, yeah, comment below if you've got a cool story from Sri Lanka back in the day. I would love to hear it. So thanks as always for the support. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe. Looking forward to sharing many more stories with you. For now, it's goodbye from me, and I'll see you in the next episode.